Planning Board Administrator, Jennifer Taylor from the City Law Department, and Lisa Agans, our Recording Secretary. Our rules of procedure are as follows. Notice of this hearing has been published. Copies of today's agenda are located on the table in front of us. You are welcome to come down and pick one up. The cases on the consent agenda will be heard first. Consent cases are perceived by the Planning Board to be non-controversial, have already been heard, or been recommended for layover, and therefore will be read and voted on without the opportunity for your testimony. If you wish to testify, you may remove the case from the consent agenda. When each consent case is read, I will ask if anyone wants the case removed. If you do, please stand up and say so, and the case will be removed. This case will then be heard in order in which it appears on the regular agenda after we go through the consent cases. When the case is heard, you will have the opportunity to come to the podium, clearly state your name and address, and give your testimony at that time. When hearing cases on the regular agenda, the board will first hear from the applicant. And after the applicant states their case, we will hear from the proponents, and then we will hear from the opponents. After both sides are heard, the public hearing will be closed, and no additional testimony will be permitted unless a board member requests additional information. When at the podium, please clearly state your name, address, and whom you are representing for the record. Your testimony is very important to us. In the interest of time and courtesy to others, please be short and to the point. We will try to limit each case to 10 minutes. Those directly involved in the case, please speak first. We request that large groups select a spokesperson to represent that group, therefore eliminating repetitive testimony. When giving testimony, please provide new information and try not to repeat what has been previously said. We do ask that all speakers and others be treated with courtesy and with respect. In that regard, please remain silent while seated, and please turn off your cell phones. Our decision to approve, deny, or continue a case made here today will be forwarded to the City Council for another public hearing and final disposition by the City Council. Conditional use permits are an exception to this rule. The board's decision made here today on conditional use permits are final and not forwarded to the City Council. Lastly, upon the advice of the Law Department, all communications to the board members from attorneys or other interested parties should be transmitted through the Planning Department so that they are made a part of the public record. The department will then transmit all that information to the board as well as to the rest of the public. Rezoning matters are an exception to this rule. A current copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act can be found in a white binder on the east wall of this room. And there are no changes to the current consent agenda, so we will get started with the reading of the consent agenda. Agenda item number 3, case C10-19-146, C12-19-147, applicant Spire Foundation, LLC. It is on for layover. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Spire Club at Pacific Reserve, a minor plat outside the city limits with waiver to section 5384D lot frontage, along with rezoning from R5 to DR. This was laid over from our October 2nd meeting. Location 1110, 1116, 1119, 1125 South 206th Circle. Does anyone wish to remove this from the consent agenda? Seeing none, agenda item number 4, case C10-19-214, C12-19-215, applicant Royce Enterprises, Inc. It is on for approval. Request preliminary plat approval of Estates at Loveland, a subdivision inside city limits with the waiver of section 5382B cul-de-sac length, along with rezoning from R2 to R4. This was also laid over from our October meeting. Location southeast of 87th and Pacific Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Seeing none. Agenda item number 6, case C8-19-158, applicant Spire Foundation LLC. It is on for layover. Request approval of a special use permit to allow outdoor sports and recreation in a DR district. This was laid over from our October 2nd meeting. Location 1110, 1116, 1119, 1125, South 206th Circle. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Agenda item number 9, case C10-14-81, C12-19-233. Applicant 192 Maple LLC, 180 Maple LLC. It is on for approval. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Antler View East Replat 1, a minor plat outside the city limits with rezoning from R7 and MU to R7 and MU, along with a major amendment to the mixed-use agreement for Antler View East. Location southwest of West Maple Road and Big Elk Parkway. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Seeing none, agenda item number 11, case C10-19-234, applicant Michael Hall, on for approval. Request rezoning from R435 to R4, location 3916 Miami Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item 12, case C10-19-235, applicant Holy Name Housing. It is on for approval. Request rezoning from R535 to R5, location 3602, 3604, 3605 Erskine Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, seeing none, agenda item number 13, case C10-19-236, applicant Paul Calley. It is on for approval. Request approval of the MCC Major Commercial Corridor Overlay District, location 7340 and 7348 Blondo Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Seeing none, agenda item number 14, case C10-19-237, applicant Mary Our Queen Church. It is on for approval. Request approval of the MCC Major Commercial Corridor Overlay District, location 3404 South 119th Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Seeing none, agenda item number 15, C10-19-243, applicant Drew Trotter Miller Commerce. It is on for approval. Request approval of the MCC Major Commercial Corridor Overlay District, location southeast of 189th Street and West Maple Road. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, seeing none, agenda item number 16, case C10-19-238, applicant Brian Marinus. It is on for approval. Request rezoning from R2 to R5, location 5017 South 134th Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Seeing none, moving on. Agenda item number 19, case C7-19-241, applicant Hertz. It is on for approval. Request approval of a conditional use permit to allow auto rentals in the CBD. Property is located within an ACI 1 overlay district, location northeast and southeast of 10th and Jackson Streets. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, seeing one, the final one, agenda item number 20, case C7-7-73, applicant Joe Tarasic. It is on for approval. Request approval of a major amendment to a conditional use permit to allow hospital services general in the GO district, location 8303 Dodge Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a motion from the board for the consent items that are on for approval.
Motion to approve case numbers 4, 9, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 19, and 20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you please record the vote?
Carnes?
Yes, but I abstain on item number 4.
Okay. Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay, do we have a motion for consent items on for layover?
Motion to lay over items number 3 and 6.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you please record the vote?
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Franklin?
Yes.
Carnes?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay, those consent items that we just voted on, there will be no further action on those cases. You are free, if you were here for one of those, you are free to stay, you are free to leave, but those cases, no more action taken on those at this meeting. The first two items are on administrative meeting only, so there will be no opportunity for public testimony. Agenda item number 1, case C10-19-141, C12-19-142. Applicant Mark Lampy is on for, request is final plat approval of Gold Meadows, lots 1 through 16, outlots A and B, along with rezoning from R435 to DR, R4, and R5. Location, northwest of 50th and Bancroft Streets. Eric?
Yeah, so the preliminary plat was recommended for approval by the planning board on August 7th and approved by city council on October 8th. The final plat is identical to the approved preliminary plat and creates 16 single-family residential lots. The proposed subdivision is consistent with and carries out the goals and objectives of the City of Omaha Master Plan. Staff recommends approval of the rezoning from R435 to DR, R4, and R5. Approval of the final plat subject to submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to forwarding to City Council.
Any comments or questions from the board? Do we have a motion?
I motion for approval of the rezoning from R435 to DR, R4, and R5, and approval of the final plat subject to submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to forwarding the request to the City Council for final action.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you record the vote?
Moore?
Yes.
Morris? Franklin? Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Agenda item number 2, case C10-19-120, C12-19-121. Applicant RLR Investments, LLC, requests final approval of R&L Carriers Edition, Lot 1, a subdivision outside the city limits with rezoning from AG to GI. Location, northeast of 117th and State Streets. Eric?
Yeah, so the preliminary plat was recommended for approval July 3rd and approved by City Council on September 10th. This is the first phase, which includes just one lot only for R&L Carriers for a truck terminal, and just the platting of that. The final plat is identical to the approved preliminary plat, and staff recommends approval of the rezoning from AG to GI. Approval of the final plat subject to removing Phase 1 from the plat name and submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to City Council.
Any comments or questions? Do we have a motion?
I move for approval of the rezoning from AG to GI, approval of the final plat subject to removing Phase 1 from the plat name and submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to forwarding the request to City Council for final action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you record the vote, please?
Morris? Yes. Franklin? Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Agenda item number 5, case C7-5-216, applicant Stonebridge Christian Church. Request approval of a major amendment to the conditional use permit to allow religious assembly in the R4 district with a waiver of section 55-186 height to allow a 37-foot tall building. This was laid over from our October meeting. Location, 15801 Butler Ave. May we hear from the applicant, please?
Kyle Hazy with E&A Consulting Group, 10909 Mill Valley Road, Omaha, Nebraska, representing the applicant. The project of discussion today is located on the southwest corner of 156 and Butler Streets. We are requesting an amendment to the existing conditional use permit to allow for religious assembly within an R4 zoning, and to allow for 37 foot of building height where 35 foot is the generally allowed height. The change of this conditional use permit is required due to the proposed church expansion, as shown here in blue. The white building is the building as is. The expansion will provide for a new assembly area, and the old assembly area will be concentrated to an area to provide the needs and meet the needs of the children and the teens within the congregation. Since the last time in front of Planning Board, the applicant has worked along with the city parks and planning staff to come up with an agreeable answer to the trail connection that was of concern last time. I believe the connection of the trail along 159th Avenue and along Taylor Streets, connecting with the existing trail across the street as seen here in yellow at the street light, is the most reasonable and safest solution to the question for the trail connection. The solution is supported by the applicant, park staff, and city planning staff, and the applicant agrees to all conditions of approval as stated within the rec report. And I will make myself available for any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any other proponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, are there any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Comments or questions from the board?
I'll just make a comment just to commend staff and the applicant for working on a resolution to that trail so that it works. I think it's a good job. Well done.
Okay. Eric?
Yeah, so obviously we're glad that we could come to an acceptable solution, and due to the steep terrain and grades on that southern portion of the site, it just didn't make sense. So Public Works, Parks, Planning, as Kyle had mentioned, are all on board with this solution. I do want to point out that there has been a traffic study that's been submitted. The applicant will be required to comply with any provisions of the final approved traffic study. Staff recommends, I guess before I go to the approval, there is a waiver of height, which is not uncommon for civic facilities within residential districts, so we are supportive of that. Staff recommends approval of the waiver of section 55-186 height to allow a 37-foot tall building, and approval of the major amendment to the conditional use permit to allow religious assembly subject to the 8 conditions listed in the recommendation report.
Okay, any further comments or questions? Do we have a motion?
A motion for approval of the waiver of section 55-186 height to allow a 37-foot tall building, and approval of a major amendment to a conditional use permit to allow religious assembly subject to the 8 conditions in the recommendation report.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you please record the vote?
Franklin? Yes. Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris? Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion approved.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 7, case C3-19-230, applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha, request approval of the extremely blighted designation. Location, area bound by Interstate 680 on the north, Harrison Street on the south, 72nd Street on the west, and the Missouri River on the east. And Bridget, you're presenting.
Good afternoon, Bridget Hadley, City Planning Department. Also presenting will be Senator Justin Wayne, who is here with us, as well as Trevor Fitzgerald, who is the legal counsel for the Urban Affairs Committee at the legislature. I think what I want to do is first say that the extremely blighted areas is a new definition to the community development law as the result of the passage of LB 86, which was just passed at this most recent legislative session that was held this year. And I will just read it briefly. extremely blighted areas means a substandard and blighted area, and for the city of Omaha, substandard and blighted areas are our CRAs. So means a substandard and blighted area in which the average rate of unemployment in the area during the period covered by the most recent Federal Decennial Census or American Community Survey 5-year estimate is at least 200% of the average rate of unemployment in the state during the same period, and the average poverty rate in the area exceeds 20% for the total federal census tract or tracts or federal census block group or block groups in the area. So for us, by definition, these extremely blighted areas for the city of Omaha, I should say, the extremely blighted areas had to exist in a CRA. So I'll put this up first and then I'll come back to the other map. On the city of Omaha planning website and on the tax increment financing website, we do have this map. This is not a new map. It's been out there for a couple of years. But this actually shows you where the existing CRAs are within the city of Omaha. So it's all the areas you see shaded in that light purple area. So by definition, extremely blighted areas have to be in that area. So the city of Omaha decided we're going to start with that and look at areas, those particular areas first. Excuse me. So the map, and I know you had several maps in your packet, but you did have this map in your packet. This map actually was designed to show you first the crosshatch areas, which are our CRA areas, to let you know that's where we began. Then we said, and also let me say that most of our CRAs have been in existence for either several years or even decades. And they're designed to help promote revitalization and redevelopment in these particular areas. So we started there, and those are the crosshatched areas. They were determined using census block group. Most of those areas and boundaries were determined using census block group level data. So with that, we said we're going to now take parts A and B of this extremely blighted area, meaning the higher unemployment level and the poverty rate level, and use census block level data to determine what areas that exist in the CRA would actually meet the higher unemployment and the poverty rates. The result were the areas that you see underneath the shaded areas underneath the crosshatch, which are in green, that were actually identified as the eligible areas or qualifying areas for extremely blighted areas. So it would not be and is not all of the CRAs. It's only the areas that you see in green on this particular map. So I just wanted to at least explain what extremely blighted areas are by definition of the community development law and our approach, the city's approach in determining and identifying what areas we felt would be eligible and how we came up with those boundaries. So I want to now turn it over to Senator Wayne to talk more about maybe the intent behind the change of the law to allow for this extremely blighted areas, which is really to help with affordable housing and home ownership.
Thank you, Bridget.
Good afternoon, members of the Planning Board. My name is Justin Wayne, Justin Wayne, and I reside at 8937 North 56th Avenue Circle, and I represent Legislative District 13, which is North Omaha and Northeast Douglas County. I'm testifying this afternoon in support of the proposed to designate certain areas of the city as extremely blighted pursuant to the Community Development Law. Earlier this year, the legislature passed LB 86, a bill I introduced that was designed to encourage development of affordable housing and spur home ownership in the hardest hit areas of the state. I'll just briefly talk about two provisions. LB 86 contained primary two changes. Was first, beginning in 2020 tax year, it provides for an income tax credit to any individual who purchases a residence inside the area that has been designated as a extremely blighted area. Second, it provides funding preference for grants and loans under the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for affordable housing projects in areas that are designated as extremely blighted. It is critical that we move this forward, as next year, obviously around the corner, is 2020, and we are trying to spur homeownerships because we know that is part of building assets and wealth for our community, particularly the community that I represent, and that's what the intention of this bill were, and I'll be here to, I don't know if I answer questions here, I usually don't come before the planning board, so I'm a little rusty on what I'm supposed to do after this point, but say thank you and move this forward.
Hey, Senator, I have one question for
Yes.
you. How long do you have to own the house to get the tax credit, and is it a one-time tax credit?
It is a one-time tax credit. There is a look-back provision for 2 years, so we imagine that they would own it for at least 2 years.
Okay.
And it has to be 5 years, sorry. That
Own
was
it-
mine. That
own it
was an
for 5
amendment.
years?
Yes, it's 5 years. And there is a look-back provision for that, and it has to be the primary residence. So it isn't, you can't buy it and then rent it out. It's your primary resident.
So I have a question too, Senator. Since this was based off of previous census data, when new census data comes out, then within the next, I don't know, year, I don't know how long it takes after they do it for that to be published, but then do we redo this extreme blighted area designation, or how, I mean, how long does this last, Bridget? Maybe it's a question for Bridget and not you, I don't know.
Sure.
Sorry.
Bridget Hadley, City Planning. I can try to answer, and he may also have an answer. I don't believe there is a sunset provision for the designation, but as he had mentioned, it's for 5 years, so this is really a test to see how will this designation help with affordable housing and home ownership. I imagine that if enough people, come forward or do not take advantage of the state income tax credit, I think at the public meeting we had Monday, there was some discussion about it, and I think it may just go away if it's determined that it doesn't work or isn't that useful, but we really don't know yet.
I'm just wondering if in 2 years, we can designate additional areas as extremely blighted based on new census data.
Sorry, yes, and as far as that is concerned, I think, we don't know, but we may leave that up to our law department to give us more direction. Maybe Senator Wayne would give us direction as well, or the legislature, but that is very much a possibility because we know we will have new data that would likely be available in 2021.
Thank you.
Hi.
Can either of you talk about the real application of the tax credit? Is this a hard figure or a percentage of income? Are there any details that you can share?
I will defer that to Senator Wayne.
Sorry.
Yes, and so the public wants to know, we actually grew up together, and so we still refer to our first name basis. It is a hard number, $5,000. It's a non-refundable, so if you don't get a tax refund, you won't get additional $5,000 to get a tax refund. It's a non-refundable tax credit, and it's a hard $5,000 number.
Any other proponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, are there any opponents that wish to speak? Ma'am, are you coming down? Okay. I didn't know if you're coming down or, I didn't know if you're coming down or leaving. You're all right.
Sometimes I'm not sure. I'll tell ya. Okay, I just have questions.
Name and
I think
address,
this is
please.
Pamela Duncan, this thing here. I'm at the,
Address, please.
6302 Taylor Circle.
Okay.
Got the letter that says we're within 300 feet. Oh, I guess I shouldn't have moved that.
There you
It says
go.
we're within 300 feet of tract 6303, which I understand covers 60th and Ames. So they are in the blighted area. I got that right?
No, I don't, well, I'll let Bridget answer that, but I don't
Yes,
believe,
Bridget.
Depends on the address.
yeah, depends on your exact address, so. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just curious how an area is determined to be in this community redevelopment area, how you get into that part.
Okay. Bridget talked about that earlier, but
Yeah,
we
I couldn't
can-
quite hear
we'll
all
call
of
her up again here to to answer
Okay.
that question for you.
And then is it based on income, the census information and stuff like that, right? You want to get in here? Okay. All right.
Thank you. So Bridget Hadley, City Planning. So again, the way all of this was determined, the CRAs, which are the cross-hatched areas, those are community redevelopment areas, substandard and blighted areas, have already been designated. So those were designated based on the definitions that are in the community development law.
Okay.
So studies were done in the past to determine that they were eligible. So, and we use census tract level data and mostly census tract block group level data to determine the boundaries. If anyone understands, census tracts are the larger geographic areas. Then there are census block groups, which are groups, smaller groupings within a tract, and then there's blocks that are smaller groupings within a group, census block group. So each of those have defined boundaries. So the way most of these community redevelopment areas were determined were using census block group level data and boundaries.
Okay.
So in terms of, is it based on income? No, we look for the community redevelopment areas, substandard and blighted are really looking mostly at a lot of the physical features and conditions of an area.
There you go.
There is a part B of the blighted definition that does go into 4 different demographic type characteristics. One of them is unemployment. Another is per capita income. So per capita income does factor into, does an area meet a CRA, but it's a fraction, if you will, only a portion of that determination.
Okay, so it has to do with the condition of the area also.
Mostly the
There you
condition.
go. Okay.
Okay.
We've been trying to get something done on Ames Avenue from 60th Street to 66th Street for 30 years. That is blighted, in our opinion. There's a lot of closed buildings, been a lot of problems along there, a lot of traffic problems, all kinds of things, and it's just like been very frustrating. So I think that should be designated blighted, and I think something should be done about it. Back in 2010, the city voted on a big program on making the whole city better, and they set up alliances. 6 alliances, which is groups of homeowners associations in certain areas. Ours was the Benson Ames Alliance. And for 5 or 6 years, they worked on the Benson shopping area, which also got a blighted area. And then it comes time to work on Ames, and they disband the group. So we haven't had any help along 60th and Ames from 60th to 66th for a long time. So, and just been trying to get something done there. It's been very difficult.
Okay. Any other points you want to make?
Well, I just ran across this thing that was in the World Herald 30 years ago. It said the same thing. And I'd be happy to give you a copy of it, because I'm surprised I even found it.
Sure. You can bring it up.
There you go. I got lots. Here's my 10 cents. It's one from the senator right there. And haven't heard from you yet, sir.
You can just give them all to Eric, and he'll pass them down.
I'll just give you a whole lot here now. Let's see, this person said, this is from the Public Post from 1988. They said the same thing,
Okay.
and we're 30 years later, we're not getting anywhere.
Thank you.
Folks,
Any other opponents that wish to speak?
I'm not really an opponent, I'm neutral.
Okay. Gotcha. Any other opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Bridget, would you like to come up and?
Bridget Hadley, City Planning. I just wanted to say to the lady that just came up, so again, a part of the packet and as well on the City Planning Department website, on the left-hand side, there's a tab that says Maps. You can find all the planning board cases and all the exhibits. Part of the exhibits for this case are a book of maps, and you will see, first of all, this larger map, and then as you continue to scroll, you'll see small maps behind that, which are the blown-up areas of of the various areas of the extremely blighted area. So she was speaking about 60th and Ames, and I just thought I'd see if it was in here. So 60th and Ames, as far as extremely blighted, it's only this piece, and that's because that is the only piece that is a CRA. And I just wanted to say, in order for areas to become CRAs, it's a reactive type situation most of the time where the city waits for a developer to present a project to us. And if it's not in a CRA, then there is a process that they have to go through, that we go through, the city goes through, where they request that area to be designated as a CRA. We will study it just like we did, for the most part, for the extremely blighted. And we bring that to our TIF committee, to the planning board, and then the city council. So evidently there hasn't been enough interest or maybe even the right types of projects brought to us in order for us to look at designating that area. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you, Bridget. Any comments or questions from the board before we hear from Eric? Eric,
Recommend approval.
do we have a motion?
I move for approval.
Second.
Lisa, will you, we have a motion and a second. Will you please record the vote?
Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Franklin?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion approved.
Agenda item number 8, case C3-19-209. Applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha request approval of the Laird Street Habitat Redevelopment Project 6 TIF Redevelopment Project Plan. Location, area bound by 16th Street to the east, 23rd Street to the west, Sailor Street to the north, and Pratt Street to the south. Don, you're presenting?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead.
Don Seaton, Omaha City Planning. Little vicinity map up here. The light helps. This is King Science Middle School, North Omaha. The yellow areas are areas of the developments for the single-family homes. Developers Habitat for Humanity, they've done previous TIFs in North Omaha, a lot of single-family homes. They've also been very active in this particular neighborhood. Proposal here is for 12 new single-family homes. They're all on existing vacant sites. Total project cost is $2.6 million. A little north of that, they're asking for $269,500 in TIF support. This meets the requirements of our TIF program. It's an appropriate land use for the area. It complies with our master plan. We ask for your approval.
Okay. And earlier, upstairs, you'd said that 5 homes have already been demolished.
Yeah, there were some dilapidated structures on some of these sites. A typical house, by the way. And those have already been cleared out.
Okay. Thank you, Don. Any other proponents that wish to speak?
Good afternoon. I'm Al Shimmick. I'm the CFO with Habitat for Humanity, Omaha. We're at 1701 North 24th Street, and literally I'm just here available for questions, if any.
Thank you, Al. Any other proponents? Seeing none, are there any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments or questions?
Staff recommends approval.
Okay. We have a motion? We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you please record the vote?
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris? Franklin?
Yes.
Carnes?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion approved.
Agenda item number 10, case C10-19-92, C12-19-93, applicant Paul Smith, request revised preliminary and final plat approval of Millwork Commons, lots 1 through 7, a subdivision inside the city limits with rezoning from CBD and HI to CBD and HI with repeal of the ACI 1 overlay district, along with approval of the NCE overlay district, location northeast of 14th and Nicholas Streets. May we hear from the applicant, please?
Yeah, I'm Katie Underwood with Olson, 2111 South 67th Street, here representing Paul. I also have Luke Weatherly, my colleague from Olson, as well as Jen Ratner with Dvorak Law. We were in front of you guys back in June for the preliminary plat approval. We have some slight changes to that and are doing a revised prelim plat and also doing the final plat for the first phase and rezoning. And so we're happy to answer questions that you guys may have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other proponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, any opponents? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Additional comments, questions from the board? Eric?
Yeah, so as Katie mentioned, we have a revised preliminary plat, and then the first phase final plat, which includes 7 platted lots for about 23 acres. There will be zoning changes to include both CBD and HI. There is also the repeal of the existing ACI overlay district, but in its place will be an NCE overlay. There's a few conditions that mention some modifications to the NCE plan. That's just so it lines up with what's being final platted and just looking at the overall plan. So staff is recommending approval of the rezoning from CBD and HI to CBD and HI, repeal of the existing ACI 1 overlay, approval of the NCE overlay district subject to submittal of an acceptable final plan prior to forwarding to City Council, approval of the revised preliminary plat subject to the 9 conditions in your report, approval of the final plat of lots 1 through 7 subject to the conditions of revised preliminary plat and submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement.
Do we have a motion?
Motion for approval of the rezoning from CBD and HI to CBD and HI, repeal of the existing ACI 1 overlay district, approval of the NCE overlay district subject to submittal of an acceptable final plan prior to forwarding to City Council, approval of the revised preliminary plat subject to the 9 conditions in the recommendation report, and approval of the final plat of lots 1 through 7 subject to the conditions of the revised preliminary plat and submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to forwarding to City Council.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you record the vote?
Moore?
Yes.
Morris? Yes. Franklin?
Yes.
Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Agenda item number 17, case C11-84-261A, applicant Design 8 Studios, request approval of a major amendment to the PUD Plan Unit Development Overlay District to revise the approved signage. Location, 7300 Graceland Drive. May we hear from the applicant, please?
Good afternoon, members. My name is Joe Proctor with Design 8 Studios, 5801 North 90th Street here in Omaha. What we're proposing is an amendment to the planned unit development for formerly called Skyline Manor is being renamed to Keystone Senior Community. It's been bought by a new company, and they are changing the name and also updating all of the signage. Current signage on the property is way out of code. Way out of code and has been for several years from my understanding. The last time the PUD was amended was, I believe, 1984. So we attempted to file sign permits, pull permits, and we, of course, found out we were way out of our budget for signs. And Jerry Ziska with City of Omaha suggested we apply for a major amendment to the PUD. So we ask for your approval.
Okay. Thank you. Any other proponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, are there any opponents? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments, questions from the board? Eric, can we get your...
Yeah, so there are a number of waivers that would be necessary for this major amendment. To summarize those, it would be total budget from 80 square feet to 291 square feet, and then maximum allowed square footage for 3 different wall signs. I want to point out there are 2 monument signs, one that is existing and one that is proposed. The existing monument sign that is in the right-of-way will need either the appropriate encroachment permit from the state of Nebraska or working with City of Omaha Public Works to make sure the appropriate lease is on file. Regarding sign number 1, which is proposed to be a new monument sign, it is proposed to be within the right-of-way, and staff is not supportive of that. So we are asking for a resubmittal of a site plan to show the location of sign number 1 to be located within the property and comply with the normal setbacks of such sign. That being said, we are recommending approval of the major amendment to a PUD, subject to the 4 conditions listed in the recommendation report.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Motion to approve the major amendment to the PUD, subject to the 4 items in the staff report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you record the vote, please?
Morris?
Yes.
Franklin? Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Motion approved.
Agenda item number 18, case C11-19-240, applicant Noddle Homes, request approval of a PUR planned unit redevelopment overlay district, location 501 South 38th Street. May we hear from the applicant, please?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, city staff, my name is Jay Noddle, 2285 South 67th Street in Aksarben Village. Pleased to be here today. I thought it would be worthwhile, probably meaningful, to give you a little bit of background as to why we're interested in doing this project. We have a particular interest in working in the eastern half of our city. Many of you may know that I am honored to be the chairman of our Urban Core Committee, our community's Urban Core Committee, which is a group of community folks representing landowners, employers, business, civic leaders, the chamber, and the city. And our focus has been to think about what can we do to improve life in all aspects in the core of our city. And one of the things we've learned over the years through the various projects we've all been involved in and different initiatives, all the studies that have been done about how Omaha compares to peer communities, one of the sort of the overarching fundamental things that we've learned is that how the core of the city works, how the core of the city goes, in large part has an impact on how the whole region works. So in essence, we want the core of our city to be vibrant, we want it to be safe, we want it to have great employment opportunities. Housing is very important if we're going to continue to grow jobs in the core of our city. And certainly things like amenities, transportation, an urban circulator, and all of those kinds of things, parks, a food store, many of those kinds of things will follow and sort of fall in place as the core of the city grows and as the core of the city improves itself. So because of our work on so many civic projects, that's what's really sparked my personal interest in the core of the city. And there are many folks that believe this is about money. And I can promise you that while it's important not to lose money when you do projects, what this is really about is to get things started, to set an example, and to show developers, property owners, and our entire community that we can do a lot more in the core of the city, and we can do it in a well-thought-out, thorough, and meaningful way. So we have, as a company, spent quite a lot of time looking at 3 or 4 peer communities, at least in our opinion, peer communities. So communities like Minneapolis, Kansas City, and Denver in particular. And we've actually gone to some of those communities and walked the streets to get a feel for how does it feel at the pedestrian level in a neighborhood similar to the Gold Coast or the Blackstone neighborhood. How does it feel when there are different kinds of projects, different kinds of architecture, things that are of different scale, a blend of the new and the not so new, and things that are historic. What can we do? How can we do this? And as luck would have it, 38th and Dewey was offered to us. It appears to us to be well located. The real estate that we are buying is not historic. I do understand that our neighbor to the south has a feeling that there may be an adverse possession issue for about 15 feet of property, which would be on the south end of what we intend to acquire. That's really a business issue, and we haven't gotten there with them yet. I don't think it affects necessarily the viability of the project. It may certainly affect the value that we can pay for the land, but that's a business matter, and I don't think it's a matter that's of any consequence for this board. The other thing that's important to note here is we had a few choices about how to apply for the zoning here. And as all of you know, the city planning department created the RPUR category several years ago, and that's really intended in many cases for projects like this that don't necessarily fit specifically in any of the other categories. However, in this case, we could have applied under the R7. We chose to apply under the PUR for R6. And what that does is it really, as a practical matter, gives the city a little bit more input. As many of you know, our MO over the decades has been to try to be very inclusive and collaborative, not only with the city, but with the neighbors. In any part of the community we're working in for any type of project. And all we can really do is put our best foot forward. We can make phone calls, we can send emails, we can offer to sit down with adjacent property owners or neighborhood associations. But if they don't respond, or if we find that people are unwilling to be reasonable and collaborative, it makes it a little bit more difficult to be collaborative. In this case, we see an opportunity for 15 condominiums. We've been working with a few of our state senators to work with the legislature to reform some condominium statutes and requirements in the state of Nebraska, so condominium development really can be sort of broken loose and opened up. It's been very difficult for anyone to develop condominiums in Nebraska for quite a long time because of those statutes. And we feel like we've made a lot of good progress, and with a little bit of good fortune, when the legislature meets at the beginning of next year, we think that there can be some reform to some of these regulations and statutes that are going to open the doors for more condominium development. And what that does is it gives potential homeowners more choices for investment in more locations throughout our city. So we have designed a project, as I mentioned, that from the very beginning met all the parking requirements. We've got one parking stall for each bedroom under the building. We're not depending on other sources for parking for our owners or our residents. And we believe, by the way, that our owners will be our residents. This is not the kind of project that we can anticipate people buying multiple units and then leasing some of them. We wouldn't necessarily prevent that, but that's not the kind of owner we want to have in this project. So we tried to address parking at the beginning. We think that the scale is right for the neighborhood. We've thought an awful lot about the architecture and the materials. And one of the things we've learned over the years is when you try to replicate or, for lack of a better term, mimic something that's historic, usually it doesn't come off very well. It's either not affordable or it's not aesthetically pleasing or people just don't like it. So we landed on the style we've landed on. Since we have representatives of my company have met with the adjacent property owners at the beginning, and the property owner, the homeowners association in the neighborhood, since those discussions have taken place, we've made several changes. We've tried to soften the colors, we've changed the materials a little bit. We've got primary materials on the west and on the north side of the building. We've added a couple thousand square feet of additional brick to the building. We've put some mullions in the windows to come a little bit closer to matching up with the style of some of the architecture in the neighborhood. We've softened the pedestrian level. We've made the decision that we will include public art. We haven't determined yet who will help us select that art, but we have every intention of having a little group that can help us think about what would fit and see if we can't collectively make a decision on a couple artists to ask for a proposal. At the end of the day, we're going to pay for it, the art that is, so I want to be a little careful and not go too far. But I think we've worked pretty darn hard. And I want to move forward. We intend on moving forward. We'd like you to vote today to approve the project. We know that we need to come to the council in the weeks ahead, and we're prepared to do that. We're also prepared to continue to listen to folks in the neighborhood. But what we're not prepared to do is to change the style of the project. I don't want to throw that out. If we throw that out, then the fundamentals that we think are important to bring 15 $400,000 buyers to this location would be compromised to the point where I don't know that our heart would be in it any longer. So that isn't anything other than factual. We really want to do this. I think we have worked hard to communicate with the neighborhood. And, you know, I just want to go back and say one last thing about the status of this property. There's nothing historic about the property we're buying. And while there are important structures in the neighborhood, if you look throughout the broader neighborhood, and all you need to do is go a block and a half or 2 blocks, there's quite a collection of architecture. Most projects built in the 60s and beyond. Certainly there are a few that were built earlier than that, and they're important. But when you look throughout this neighborhood, there's lots of apartments, there's university facilities, there are care facilities for folks that have different kinds of challenges. Nothing wrong with any of that, and everybody can coexist. And I just would, in closing, say to you that when we look at cities that are peer, aspirational peers for Omaha, and we look at neighborhoods like this, with big employers, all around, and new development taking place, a little bit of eclectic development is attractive, and it makes sense for those that are going to live there tomorrow and for decades to come. So I'm here, others on our team are here. We're happy to answer any questions when we get to that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. Any other proponents that wish to speak?
Right behind you here. Good afternoon. Scott Dobby, Omaha by Design, 618 South 11th Street. Here in support, we've spoken with neighbors, a number of neighbors reached out, also the developers. Really do think that, everybody comes to this with good intentions. I think everybody certainly agrees, as do we, that the Gold Coast and Blackstone neighborhoods are just really special neighborhoods in the city. We love every neighborhood in the city, but these do have a very unique concentration of particularly spectacular historic homes. I've walked it. It certainly is kind of a blend, as was said. There are quite a number, of great things that were built in the 1890s to the 1910s, kind of reflecting Omaha's development then. But it also continues. Just out of curiosity, if I can replace this for a second, I went to the city assessor's website, and was curious. So I looked at the construction date of the properties kind of roughly within a one-block walk of the property. The property's outlined in red there. You can see it here. And you'll see quite a range. I mean, we have pretty much every decade represented from the 1890s till today, minus the 1930s and the 2000s, interestingly. But it's definitely a blend. And I would also mention, even on the historic side of things, something can be officially designated historic after it's 50 years old. You all know this, of course. And so while there are some historic properties from 1910, which are gorgeous and we'd always advocate for protecting to the highest degree, there's even as recently as the 1966 project, the Danish Brotherhood Project, which is now on the National Historic Register. So it shows that even in a neighborhood like this, what it means to be historic and contributing doesn't necessarily have to align with a singular time frame. You know, big picture, just a few key points why we would support development like this. We think it adds walkability to schools, to parks, to businesses, a lot of locally owned businesses I'd mention. It provides what I think is an appropriate level of density, actually a lot lower than a lot of its neighbors, but still, you know, 15 units is something that helps those businesses again. It also supports the city's goals and its current and future, potentially future transit options. It provides options for homeownership. I mean, albeit at a certain level, it is new residents who would be invested in the community, both socially as well as financially, clearly. And, you know, that financial investment that supports the local tax base. It makes good use of our existing infrastructure, again, all goals that we want to see with infill development. Ultimately, I think the biggest question appears to be a stylistic one. And that's where I think we have to differentiate between our individual stylistic preferences and, you know, instead really look at the design quality that underlies it. And that's where in a tough case here where we came out in support because we believe that what we're seeing is very high quality materials. The public fronting spaces are well thought through. I see a green roof and a lot of well thought through landscaping. The parking is hidden. The public art, you know, pieces like that I think can make it a real contributing piece to its neighborhood and respect but be quite different from many of its neighbors. So with that, I just would say, you know, in general, we do believe and we support because we think it achieves the broad community goals we're after while at the same time being true to its own time and place. So thank you, and I'm available for questions as well. Thank you.
Any other proponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, are there any opponents that wish to speak? Before you start, how many people are down here this afternoon for this case? Do you want to raise your hands? And how many of you wish to speak this afternoon? Okay, if you want to speak, you can come. Why don't you come on down and take a seat in the front row, and that'll help speed things up a little bit. We're here. We'll listen to everybody that wants to talk. I just want to say this before we get started. We have your resolution from the Blackstone Neighborhood Association, and we've read through that. We've got all of your letters, your correspondence, and all of those things. And we understand there's a lot of opposition in certain areas. Some of them are style, the density, the height, setbacks, the placement, materials, parking, integrity, variances. And like I said, we'll listen to anybody that wants to speak. We'll stay here as long as you want. But we'd like it if you would, if you're going to address some of those points, if you could be short and to the point and try not to repeat what's already been offered in your resolution. So, sir, if you want to go, your name and address, please.
Thank you. My name is Mark Von Drosik. I live at 555 South 34th Street, just a few blocks from this development. And I assume since the thing I want to talk about is not on your list, I can speak at length. I'm joking. I'm not going to speak at length. But the thing I want to add to your list is affordability as an issue on this project. I am not opposed really to the style of this project. I think it's appropriate for the general neighborhood. I like the new modern design, but I do think there's a important historic aspect on this intersection in particular. But there's a development just to the west of this in a building that was remodeled and gutted, and the rents went from something like $750 a month to over $2,000 a month. There's a project just a block to the east of this project where the rents went up, where there was an older house-like structure that wasn't necessarily affordable housing, but it was a mansion of some kind. And my point is there's a lot of different kinds of development that is happening in this neighborhood, but the common denominator under all of it is that it's all unaffordable for working class people. I am a poor working class person running for the legislature in Midtown in District 9, and I hope I'm not the only person who speaks today on the affordability issue in regards to this development. It's interesting the things that this gentleman said about the project. So goes the center of the city, so goes the region. I'm of the opinion that all of the development that's happening in this city is for affluent residents of this city, for people who will be expected to make a certain amount of money and live in these developments. I go to every city council meeting and I listen to all of the plats. I go to different meetings around the city, different neighborhood association meetings with these developers, and they talk about, when you ask them who's going to live in these buildings to afford these rents, and they always say, well, it's doctors. We're building a whole city for doctors, I guess, so an entire neighborhood for doctors. And it's of my opinion that these developments like Millworks Commons and the new development that's going to happen downtown in the old market on the ConAgra campus, we're building completely new neighborhoods where hundreds and thousands of people are going to live, and none of it's going to be able to be affordable to people who work 40 hours a week, working $9 an hour at the minimum wage in the state of Nebraska. Where are poor people going to live? When I ask that question to developers, they say this new luxury development will eventually degrade over time and become more low rent, and that's how affordable housing is created. We just wait for it to deteriorate to the point where it's worth less and you can't charge such and such for it. So I hope I've been heard here today, and I just wanted to raise the issue of affordability on all of these developments. And I do want to say the historic aspect on this particular intersection is also important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, anyone else?
Of course.
Of course.
First, I'm going to put
Need your name and address, please.
my name is Rhonda Stuberg. I live at 3708 Farnham Street, and I'm the Blackstone Neighborhood Association president and have been for 6 years. And what I thought I would do is start out by saying that there was a whole series of events that happened before we got here today, and kind of explain that to you. Noddle had called us, Todd specifically, and wanted to meet with the neighbors, and they were said that they were planning on building a condominium on 501 South 38th Street, and we said, hey, that's wonderful. We love the idea of having some of these areas filled in with condominiums and townhouses and duplexes, and therefore, bring it on. We'd love to see it. And so we made the connection with them, and I contacted Todd and I said, I just want to make you aware that you are dealing with people in this neighborhood who are very, very invested in the historical value of this area, especially that intersection and that 38th Street Gold Coast. We want to preserve it to the best of our ability, and the way it looks and the way it feels when you walk down the street and the whole thing. And if you ever travel, you will find other cities that have these areas, and they're attractions to people who come to visit and the people who come to live here. So I said, you need to pay attention to that. And there's two things they're going to ask you. What is it going to be like a classical style that fits into the neighborhood? That is not asking a lot, and you do see that in other cities. So that was the first thing. The second thing was size. Don't make it towering over the other houses right next door to it. And if you do this, we're all going to applaud you and live happily ever after building condos with you. Well,
when he came to show us, it was this ultra-modern building that if you stand on one side, you aren't going to see the rest of the neighborhood. You're only going to see that building. It becomes the focal point of the corner. And so we all looked at him and went, really? Did you not get the memo about what we wanted like to see in the neighborhood? And they said, well, you know, we don't want it to look Disney-like. And so that didn't go over very well. And long story short, it was a unanimous vote that we did not want to see this building in the neighborhood. So please come back and see us again and work with us. Please work with us, because we do want a condo of some sort. That'd be fine. So about 2 weeks later, we sent them pictures of traditional classic architecture. We had architects send us these drawings. They're happening all over the place. And I said, just look these over and, try to stay within the codes and not ask for variances and all of this. So the second meeting came by, and we looked at the picture, and it looked like the same building, like they hadn't even made any major changes. And so once again, it was shot down unanimously. And so that is when it came to, all right, we need a resolution, because obviously we are not going to get any cooperation with them like we thought maybe we would. So I know you don't want to hear this, but we had numerous people work long and hard on it, and all of these points are extremely important to us. And I don't know who actually read it really well or remembers all the issues that are in it. So you have to bear with me to hear through them as quickly as possible. And then others will make it short and sweet and give them a more personal touch to it. So here I go. Oh, I'm going to put my lawyer glasses on, because even though I'm not a lawyer, I have to see the words. So, whereas the Blackstone Neighborhood Association's mission of historic preservation in the neighborhood includes advocating for architectural integrity in new structures and developments. And the Blackstone Neighborhood Association fights for new structures to have the same architectural integrity as existing homes and multifamily buildings regarding scale, materials, and quality. Whereas much of the Blackstone Neighborhood Association comprises the Gold Coast Historic District in our association's boundaries, and the property at 501 South 38th Street is designated as a contributing property to the Gold Coast Historic Neighborhood District. Whereas the intersection of South 38th Street and Dewey Avenue showcases some of the best examples of the best preserved historic architecture in the city, and those homes have substantial setbacks and yards. Whereas the single-family home next to the property in question at 501 South 38th Street sits well set back from the 38th Street, and the Blackstone Neighborhood Association expects that new construction adheres to the same standards and appropriate setbacks. Whereas the Blackstone Neighborhood Association is not opposed to appropriate development in the neighborhood and applauds exciting recent improvements and encourages neighborhood improvement in its many forms. Whereas when proposed projects do not improve the historic quality of the existing neighborhood or complement the existing neighborhood but detract from it, the Blackstone Neighborhood Association will stand to oppose such efforts. Whereas urban design regulation encourages high density, little setbacked structures on high traffic streets, but not on low traffic streets. But neither South 38th Street nor Dewey Avenue are high traffic streets, but indeed lower traffic volume streets. Be it resolved that the proposed development of the Noddle Companies is found by the Blackstone Neighborhood Association to be inappropriate in this historic intersection for the following reasons. Style, of course. The ultra-modern design does not blend with existing structures, or even try to, rather than enhance the historic neighborhood, but detracts from it. It does not blend with existing structures. The density, the site area per unit in the Noddle Company's proposal is nearly 3 times larger than the requirement. This means that the Noddle Company's proposed development should feature 7 or 8 units, not the 15 that their design shows. The height, the project exceeds the height requirements by 10 feet. It would tower over the single-family homes that are contiguous to it. Neighborhood standards are to the peak of a building, while the proposed development has a flat roof with all the walls extending beyond the allowed height. The setbacks, perhaps most egregious, is a request for a setback variance next to the single-family residence R2 to the south of only 24 feet instead of the required 30 feet. Placement. The proposal positions the building right next to the sidewalks on the corner, pushing a building this close to the sidewalk, a variance intended for commercial, downtown projects, is not at all in keeping with the surrounding structures. We're a neighborhood, not Farnham Street. In fact, this close proximity to the sidewalk is only found in our Blackstone Neighborhood Association area in the high-traffic streets like Dodge, Farnham, Leavenworth, where this type of structure belongs. Materials. While the recent necessary addition of brick facing to the project design is welcome, other materials like longboard are not appropriate for a building with historic architectural integrity. Parking. Despite a promise that the project was fully parked with underground off-street parking, the designs fall short. Additional residents and their visitors ensure already overparked streets at this location, because of being in Blackstone, will be even more burdened. Integrity. All the buildings surround the project location at 501 South 38th Street have one, save one, are century-old structures. The proposed project is not one that's going to last 100 years. Variances. The Noddle Company is asking for an alarming 8, not 2, 3, 8 zoning variances. 1 or 2 would be enough for concern. There are no hardships requiring the request for any variances. These requests indicate that this project is inappropriate for the Blackstone Neighborhood Association's Gold Coast Historic District. And be it resolved, I won't bother you with all of that, but that we oppose the proposed Noddle Company's development of 501 South 38th Street as neighboring association demands and detracts. It does not adhere to the architectural integrity that the Blackstone Neighborhood Association demands and detracts for the valuable, irreplaceable historic quality of this particular area in the city of Omaha. So a lot of us went into this, and I thank you for taking the extra time to listen to it.
Rhonda, just a couple questions before you sit down. As I drive around your neighborhood, walk around the neighborhood, I see all types of buildings and heights of buildings, not far from where this would be located.
Mm-hmm.
Are you all right with the height of those buildings?
Those buildings have been around a long time.
Okay.
My neighbors and myself, most of the neighbors that own these older homes around or live in the condos or whatever right in that area have lived there for a long time. It's been increasingly improving over the last 10 years since I've been here. Some of it good, some of it not so good. We're getting extremely worried about the fact that we want to keep a small portion of that area looking like it used to. But little by little, developers are eating away at our neighborhood, and we seem to not have any ability whatsoever as invested neighbors to stop it. And so when does it stop? When do we have any control over our own neighborhood?
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean,
Pardon? That's up to your neighbors a lot of time because one of your neighbors is selling the property. It's not a...
That house was owned by someone who was renting it out for years and years. It was not kept up. People had tried to purchase it in the past as a home. It was way too expensive. I don't know if you've seen how much they wanted for the property. It ranged from, like, for a while, it was like $300,000. If you saw the house, nobody's going to pay $300,000 for that house. It's a wreck. I'm sure it's not much prettier on the inside. He knew what he was doing. He wanted on the bandwagon. It's like, oh, look, if I put this, everybody's going to know. He didn't have a realtor putting a sign in we didn't even know it was for sale for a long time. So it was all to get a developer in there and, snapped it up before we even knew what was going on. So there's lots of stories I could tell you about the Blackstone District, but I'm just saying, when is enough enough? When do we have the ability to have some kind of control over our own living space where we've invested a lot of money in trying to protect these properties? So, yeah.
Another question for you. Just, if Scott with Omaha by Design was correct, his map, I think, 3625 Dewey, there's kind of modern, there's another apartment building there.
Yeah.
Are you guys okay with the architectural design of that building?
That was
And it looks
built
like it was
on the
built in
Mercer House.
2017, I
Yeah,
think.
the Mercer House burned down.
Okay.
And I'm very aware of that. We weren't overly excited with the size of it, especially the townhouses that were right next to it. But to me, there was at least an attempt to add some types of materials, and the style fits in better than what Noddle's building has tried to do.
Okay.
And so we're not only worried about its size too. They have, there's just not a lot of wiggle room. When that building goes up, everybody's going to go, whoa. And we hear that a lot about the buildings that are going up around Blackstone. They don't like, I don't know where they get that, everybody's going to be happy with this building, because I live there and I hear every day the large structures that are popping up all over the place. What am I thinking about it? Well, what am I going to do about it is the question. There's not much we can do about it.
But kind of on that topic, I have a question. Had the neighborhood association known that the property was for sale, could you make some assumptions around, actions that the association would or could have taken?
Not at the price. There was talk about trying to buy maybe the house ourselves, make some green space, or find someone who'd be willing to just put a couple of townhouses on there, or half as many condominiums. Why such a big structure? If this isn't all about money, then why does it have to be such a obtrusive building in the middle of our neighborhood? I don't see why that has to happen. I don't. I listened really careful to all of what he had to say, and I'm like, this makes absolutely no sense to me. So you can ask the rest of my neighbor friends what they think, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Rhonda.
You're welcome.
My name is Edith Bice. I live at 122 South 39th. I've just been there for 2.5 years. And I was on the list to get into the OEA for 14 years, and I finally made it. But what I didn't know is that I could not have guests and entertain like I had been doing for years and years, because there's no parking. The front of our building is filled at all times. with people that live or people who work in the neighborhood. They come in about about 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. If you go out at 7, it's empty. You go out about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and there's not a spot to park. And it goes that way day in, day out. And so I didn't think that through. I think the Noddle Company is going to have the same thing for their people because they have underneath parking only for the tenants. I don't know where their guests are going to go.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I'm Kurt Snodgrass, 632 South 38th Street. I'm the treasurer of the Blackstone Neighborhood Association. I'm very much opposed to this development, and I'd just like to add to the comments I made in the letter that I submitted to you. I hope you've read. I would really take issue with the comments Mr. Noddle made about them not finding that our neighborhood association was willing to work with them. We certainly were, but there was no give and take on their end. They have not been willing to reduce the size of this building 1 inch. Its sheer size is what makes it inappropriate for the neighborhood, as much as that's as big a factor, if not more, than the styling. It would come clear out to the corner, no setbacks, unlike all the other homes on that block. It would completely wreck the look of the nicest corner of mansions in our neighborhood that's left. I would just be aghast to see something like this built here. And I'd just like to add that I think you guys have the discretion to look at this corner and realize it is not downtown-like, which is what the ACI 1 zoning overlay is described as. This corner is residential, and it should remain looking like that with yard space. You know, we understand that there may not be a developer willing to put another single-family home there, but it needs to have setbacks that at least make the street look uniform, like it's all set back the same way. And that's very important to us, and we sure hope that this building doesn't get built as it is. If it does, I think people will be coming to this corner and looking around for years and say, why on earth did they let them build something like this next to these wonderful old homes? So I hope you'll use that discretion to deny approval.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Ranum. I'm an attorney with Croker Huck Law Firm, 2120 South 72nd Street, Suite 1200. And I represent Ron and Engra Bance. They're the owners of the property directly south of the lot at issue. It's 507 South 38th Street. It's a single-family home. They've owned the property for 25 years. It's a local landmark designated property. I'm here to address a different issue than what's been addressed by a lot of the representatives in the neighborhood, and that is the size of the lot as reflected on the site plan, specifically the south property line as reflected on the site plan that was submitted with the application. We do not think that the south property line as presented in the site plan is an accurate representation of the boundary between 501 South 38th Street and 507 South 38th Street, as there is a very distinct adverse possession issue that exists. The surveyed lot line as presented in the site plan essentially has the lot line adjacent to and maybe even covering a portion of the Bance driveway. This is a picture taken from the sidewalk on South 38th Street looking east back into the Bance property. The surveyed lot line is essentially the driveway line here. Well, this is a gate to the Bance's driveway and garage that sits in the back of the property. They installed this wrought iron fence. The wrought iron fence continues and extends and connects with a chain link fence about 16 feet from the edge of the driveway. That's been there for several years. Prior to the wrought iron fence being there was a chain link fence that served as a gate. And when that gate is enclosed, it completely encloses a portion of what that site plan is saying is the South 38th Street property into the Bance's yard. The trees that are sitting there were planted by the Bance family. There's a sandbox sitting there that they installed when they moved in for their daughter. Their daughter's now 22 years old, to give you an idea of how long the sandbox has been there. He stores personal property back there, a grill, and some tiles for his house. There's a pretty distinct issue about the size of the site that is being presented to you that really needs to be addressed and brought to your attention. I'll show another photograph. This is from inside the fencing, looking south, and there you can see the chain link fence. That chain link fence existed when they moved in 25 years ago. It has always served as the de facto boundary between the two lots. Everything on this side of the fence has been maintained exclusively by the Bance family. It was probably maintained before they moved in 1994 by the prior owner of 507 South 38th Street. Again, these are their trees that they planted. This is their landscaping that they added. This is Mr. Bance's contractor working there while I took the photo. That's about 16 feet from the edge of the driveway to the chain link fence. And it's not only just that enclosed portion, but I've got a wider angle photo. This is again standing on the sidewalk on South 38th Street. Even outside of the wrought iron fence, if you go down all the way to the sidewalk, there's this area here to the left of the driveway, which again is where the lot line is purportedly at on the site plan submitted. That landscaping has always been maintained by the owner of 507 South 38th Street. Those bushes are maintained by them. The trees are. There's some flowers here that are covered up by leaves. Down in the left-hand corner, as it butts the sidewalk, there's landscaping stones that were installed by them. So there's the south 16 feet, give or take, a little bit, of the 501 South 38th Street. We think that the Bances own by the concept of adverse possession. They've been exclusive possession of that for greater than 10 years under Nebraska law. That means they've acquired the property. And we filed a lawsuit in Douglas County District Court to confirm their ownership of it.
Steve?
Yes.
I was just, you're welcome to continue on, but this part, this really isn't our issue today.
If I could address
And-
that, Chairman.
Just a second. It's really not our issue for today. And until somebody else tells us differently, a judge or somebody, it's not part of what we would be voting on today.
Let me raise a few issues
Go
though
ahead.
for you, because I think it does play into your approval today. And ultimately, I think they own it now, the south 16 feet. The way that adverse possession works is you own it when you acquire it for 10 years. We are going to a judge to confirm their ownership, if that makes sense, not to declare that they are suddenly the owners. But I do think it makes sense with this application because what they're asking for on their waivers is dependent upon the south lot line being as it is on the site plan. So, for example, they're asking to decrease the rear yard setback requirement from 25 feet to 24 feet, to change the building coverage ratio from 50% to 65%, to change the buffer yard requirement between the two properties from 30 feet to 24 feet. Well, those waiver requests all presume that the boundary line is as it is presented on the site plan. I'm not sure that's a supportable presumption in this case. Anybody who's going out and look at it can see this issue, and I would really question that they've got title to that 16 feet. So really, if the 16 feet belongs to the Bances, as we believe it does, your setback requirement goes from 24 feet to 8 feet. The building coverage ratio goes from 65% to 76%, and the buffer yard goes from 24 feet to 8 feet. And other ratios reflected that they're seeking a waiver from would be affected as well, such as the site area per unit. I'm just focusing on 3 that are directly applicable. So with those setback requirements and with that building coverage ratio, you're getting very far afield from the underlying R6 regulations about setbacks and coverage, which you're supposed to stay in touch with on the PUR district. So I would ask, if I was in your shoes, I would be questioning what it is that I'm actually approving. Because if I'm approving it for a 24-foot setback, well, maybe it's only 8, and would I be willing to approve something that's only an 8-foot setback from the Bance property? Same with the coverage ratio, same with the buffer yard requirement. And that's why I wanted to attend today, because I think it's a serious issue that really needs to be discussed when thinking about shoehorning a very large building into a lot that may not be as large as is presented on the site plan.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nathan Zing. I live at 126 North 38th Street. I rise in opposition to these changes. Living on North 38th Street, one of the things that attracted me to buying my home there 4 years ago was the streetscape, the architecture. 38th Street is just a special street. And I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I'm just not digging the style. And the tree line on the street, up and down, is so important. I'm very supportive of the development that's going on Farnham and on Dodge, and the overall general philosophy of proper infill into the downtown. One of the reasons my wife and I chose to live in the city instead of out in the suburbs is because we like that lifestyle. But I just don't think this is the right building for the right place. And 38th Street is very special on our side of Dodge Street, and we know it's very special on the south side of Farnham too. And so we have the same feelings in the Jocelyn Castle Neighborhood Association as our colleagues in the Blackstone do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nathan. Anyone else wish to speak?
Pardon me. Good afternoon. I am Mark Macer. Thanks for hearing our concerns today. I have lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, 10 years at the current location at 500 South 38th Street, and 20 years before that at 3607 Jackson Street, right around the corner. And I've been a board member of the Blackstone Neighborhood Association since we created it 25 years ago. I started as treasurer, I served as president for over a dozen years, and now I serve as secretary. Of course, I can't help but represent the Neighborhood Association with my affiliation with it, but today I'm representing the Macer family and our historic properties at 500 South 38th Street and 3815 Dewey Avenue, commonly known as the Brandeis Millard House. It's been our privilege to finish the restoration of this Omaha landmark. While we have supported the many exciting improvements in the Blackstone neighborhood, we object to the proposed nodal development at 501 South 38th Street. We support the Blackstone Neighborhood Association's objections as stated in the resolution. We especially object to the proposed setback variance, as no other residential building in this residential section of the neighborhood is positioned this close, that is adjacent to the sidewalk. You will see that the properties on our neighborhood flyer give you an idea of what the setbacks are, and you can see the development proposed is not at all in line with that. In my many years as a board member, I've had the privilege to meet with several dozen developers, more and more in recent years as our area is becoming more attractive, which of course is wonderful. In these experiences, real estate developers have come to us before a drawing was even made to discuss issues and concerns about their general ideas for a project. As a result of these mostly good encounters, the association has rarely had issue with projects. We might have had minor issues. As a matter of fact, we have never felt it was necessary to draft a resolution objecting to something. Sadly, we were compelled to do so in this instance. Knowing by reputation of the Nodal Company's many transformational works in our city, it has been disappointing to experience their low regard for the investment of neighbors and the resulting concerns. I'd like to tell, if you indulge me for a moment, on a story. I was outside the house the other day with the dog, our dog Sadie, a golden retriever. A middle-aged couple walked by, and since I've been there forever, I know most of the regulars in the neighborhood. I didn't recognize these folks. They stopped, of course, dog, chatted a little bit. So I asked them where they're, if they were from the neighborhood, get to know them. They said they were staying in an Airbnb nearby, and they had a relative staying at the Med Center in the Buffett Cancer Center. So I asked them, had they visited the Healing Arts program with its Chihuly and Kaneko and other art installations, which are an exciting improvement in our neighborhood, and they said, of course, and they were really nice. But they said their favorite way to clear their head and relax was to come over to the tree-lined streets of this quiet neighborhood, see the historic homes, and just walk around. Sometimes we don't realize the obvious jewels we already have in our town. Sometimes outsiders have to point it out to us. If I could answer it, you asked a question, I think it was I couldn't see, Mr. Rosenbaum, about the Metz house. Rhonda said it was the Mercer house. When that developer came to the neighborhood, they talked to us first, and then they showed us an idea, and we found it austere, and long story short, they went through 2 revisions, working with us to come up with the building you see today. And Member Franklin, you asked about what the neighborhood might have done if we'd known the property was available. We talked about buying it as an association, raising the money to do that amongst ourselves. We talked about buying it as a consortium of neighbors, and we're still interested in doing that if the property were to be available. I've talked to one of our finest charitable foundations in town to make it into a park, and I mean the door is open to that. So that's to answer those questions. Let me finish by reinforcing that we, the Macer family, and the association, the Blackstone Neighborhood Association, are not against improvements in our very exciting neighborhood. We just ask that developers be sensitive to its historic nature and therefore honor instead of exploiting it. Mr. Noddle gave a great presentation today, and he gave and talked about being open to talk to us. He was on TV the last 2 nights, and that he was willing to chat with us some more. We look forward to that. But I would ask that you consider tabling this question until your next meeting to allow our 2 parties to meet to find some common ground. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Mark.
Any questions for me?
How many more people wish to speak? Just raise your hands. Okay, just 2 more? 3? Okay. Try to give us new information if you would.
Hi, my name is Diane Hayes. I currently live at 3620 Pacific Street, but for decades I've resided in the Blackstone neighborhood, just 1 block away from the proposed meeting. While living at 3817 Dewey Avenue, for so many years, we noticed a palpable difference in the amount of parking, the noise, and the just the general traffic in that area. So much so that I actually rented a decibel meter once and put it in the front window of my structure on 38th Street, and found that there, as you may know, the acceptable noise level for neighborhoods is about 40 to 50. We were actually seeing frequent peaks of 70 decibels, which is the equivalent of freeway noise. And again, this was just 1 block away from the proposed plan. I live by myself. We had 1 garage unit, similar to what Mr. Noddle is planning. I know of very few couples, especially couples in that financial range, where there would only be 1 vehicle. So it wouldn't be unusual if I decided not to park in my garage for some reason. I had things that I needed to carry in. At certain times of the day, it was literally a block away. So my concern is the noise, the traffic, the very obvious incongruence to the rest of the neighborhood. And more importantly, I question whether or not it's even necessary. Omaha is in dire need of affordable housing, and we do need the density that you're talking about. But I just talked to a very successful realtor here in town, and she tells me that there are 10 properties meeting the criteria similar to what we're talking about, $400,000 and up condos on the market right now, and the average time on the market is over 90 days. And this is a seller's market, so this is pretty profound. And half of those properties are located in Midtown. So we're not talking about housing homeless veterans. We're talking about 15 units of $400,000 each. So that's all I have to say. Do you have any questions for me, living as a person living in that area for decades and seeing those changes?
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Bob Perrin, 1101 South 36th. I'm an architect, do a lot of preservation work. And all of my work, I do my best to make sure on historic properties that when I leave, you can't tell I was there. That's not the case in this particular case. And also tell you, support the adverse possession, because I've had 2 clients with adverse possession instances, and in both cases, they got the property that they'd been taken care of. So I'm pretty sure that they're going to lose the 16 feet that they thought they had, which is reason enough for you to lay this over until the property is actually established what it is. There's a huge controversy about that one particular thing. The other one I want to point out is that the other buildings, the other high-rise kind of apartment buildings, the modern buildings were built maybe 30 to 50 years ago before we knew about historic preservation and before we were sensitive to neighborhoods. And lately we've started to come to realize that our history is extremely valuable to us. It's not replaceable. And neighborhoods like this are where we have it centralized. This is our core. And for us to instigate something that destroys that core is just a disaster. It's like a stake in the heart. This building could be, we could get units on this building. The good thing that Noddle's doing is making condominiums because ownership's very important to have people invested in it. But they're violating all the codes that we've set before them, not only our preservation codes, but our zoning code. And not only the intent of the code, but and the letter of the code. They're trying to go too high, they're trying to pack too many people on it. So we actually have a code and they said it doesn't apply to us, we're just going to keep cramming things in. So we've got this giant square block that we're trying to force into a small round hole and carve out the sides of this hole to get our block to fit. They could easily drop down the number of units. They could change the height so it's not so bad. And in fact, the height's one of the big issues because our zoning code was set up so that we were going to the ridge of a peak building, going to the ridge. We didn't plan on the eaves going clear to the top and flat roofs. So that's the intent violation. So I would see your job today is to say this just doesn't fit the zoning codes and we're responsible for the stewardship of not only the codes, but the historic integrity of our city. This is an important decision. Very important.
Thank you, Bob.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. My name is Jim Farrow. I live at 3722 Dewey Avenue, right across from the property. Matter of fact, the current design of the property, everybody has a balcony be looking out over my yard. So I've lived at our property for 17 years. We've invested a lot of money in that property.
You're just to the west across the street?
I'm to the north of the property on 38th and Dewey.
Gotcha. All right.
Yep. It has a wrought iron fence around it. So that is our property. Been there a long time. Huge investment for us. We got it when people really didn't want to move in that neighborhood. We got that in an oral auction on the driveway for less than $300,000. We think it's been a great investment for us. We spent a lot of money trying to fix it up on one income, and it's not been easy. Do a lot of work ourselves, and we think the neighborhood has really turned, and we're very engaged with the Blackstone neighborhood and the businesses around it. Our kids can walk and work in the neighborhood, which is tremendous. We appreciate the investment that Noddle has done in different parts of the city, and he's done a great job. I guess I expected more out of Noddle Homes. This is a new group for them. Noddle Development has done a lot of work. We all know that. This is one of their second step into trying to do in homes. I expected better, and when I met with Todd initially, my wife and I did, met at their offices in Exarban. We were relieved that it wasn't going to be apartments across the street. If you look at the building, it could easily be an apartment building. There's no difference between what was built at 37th and Dewey and this building. All it is, you create bigger units so you can sell them for more. There's really no, it's a box. I'm sorry, it is. They can do so much better. And I'd love to have them come back and present something a little bit better. Dr. Sebra owns the property. I know he's just passed away. We've talked to him before, and he did want to put condos on there. 15 was not his number. He was looking at 6, and I still thought that was too many, but it's his property. Noddle does not own the property today. They hope to own it if they get all your approvals. There's other developers that would love to have this piece of property and probably do it right. And I was hoping that Noddle Homes would do it right. They're not, so I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any other opponents that wish to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Jay, did you want to come back up and address some of the,
Yes, thank you. Again, Jay Noddle, 2285 South 67th in Exarban Village. Well, I appreciate all the comments today. I must say it's the first time in the history of our company I've heard it implied that we're not open-minded. I think that's what I heard. Let me address a few things, and let's start first with the topic of adverse possession. It is true, we don't own the property today. We have a contract to buy the property, we have a survey, and we have a title commitment. If a lawsuit was filed, it would be filed against the current property owner. And yes, she lost her husband, but she is still alive. And any action with regard to adverse possession would happen with the current property owner. And if in fact it turns out that they are successful with an adverse possession action, I'm probably not going to buy this property. We wouldn't be able to do the kinds of things we'd like to do there. And quite frankly, other lower scale developments would be challenged as well. So those are my thoughts about adverse possession.
my point with Steve, who's representing the owner to the south, was we're just dealing with what's in our report, our information, our legal description of the lot, what happens.
So am I.
Yep.
So that was one point.
Okay.
With respect to the zoning, the PUR tool, by its very nature, is intended to not cause a project to have to request variances and waivers. That's what PUR is for. And so there is no need to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals or anything like that. You have, as a planning staff, created a mechanism whereby things that wouldn't otherwise fit or things that wouldn't otherwise be doable can be done under that mechanism. That's why we chose PUR. Had we gone under R7, there'd likely be a lot less collaboration between the city and ourselves, but we didn't go that route. We wanted to be inclusive, and your department actually recommended we take a look at PUR because it fits. It was created for things like this. Parking. That's all part of the PUR. We have a long history of requesting more parking for projects than any other development company I know, whether it is for mixed use. Did I do that? Whether it's for mixed use, whether it's for office or retail, whether it's urban or suburban, whether it's surface or structured, and even our current residential project underway. So I'm pretty darn comfortable that we're going to meet, I think we're going to exceed parking that is included in all the comparable projects and competitive projects in the Blackstone area. No one's got one parking stall per bedroom other than this project that's new construction that I'm aware of, not on site. Trees. It's interesting, the silver maple trees that are in front of this house that's there today actually aren't doing very well. We also have a long history of trying to save trees. Lots and lots of history of trying to save trees. Our intention here is to install tulip trees, which actually are the same as those that I think are across the street from Mr. Mazur's house. let me talk about some of the changes that were made. So there was a meeting on September 24th, and we listened, and admittedly, I wasn't there, but I don't need to be there all the time. I've got a wonderful staff, and they're very caring and professional. So after that discussion, we added 2,000 square feet of brick. We lightened the color of the board material. We added window mullions to closer reflect window styles in the neighborhood. New buyers really don't want window mullions. They want great big windows without mullions, but we added those mullions. We removed the glass balconies, and we replaced them with railings, again, to sort of mimic and kind of copy things that exist in the neighborhood. We reduced and lowered the project signage. Really, we took it lower on the building, and the only signage there is an address. We added a lot more landscaping. We worked really hard on the west side of the building. As I mentioned earlier, we decided to include some public art. I don't know what it is. It could be anything. I don't know what it is. But it's got to be a gesture to the neighborhood. And it's most likely could be something that's a gesture to the historic significance in the neighborhood. We added acorn lights, the street lights. We added street benches. We reduced the size of the concrete retaining wall. We even changed the garage door to a wood door. So I think we're trying awfully hard. But at the end of the day, I think the scale is right. 15 units is not unreasonable. And actually, our building, I think, is only about 7 feet taller than the house to the south, if I understand all the elevations right. And I studied it pretty carefully this morning. So I think we're trying. I know we're trying. We'd like to build the project. Somebody's got to start this off. Somebody's got to have the courage to build a project like this in the center part of the city. I mentioned earlier that the legislature hopefully will do their thing. And, you know, again, if we want the center part of our city, the core of our city, to have more jobs and diversity amongst the jobs and more people to support this part of the city, then we've got to get these kinds of projects going. For me, I'd like to be one of the first ones. We'd like to get out there and get going and do this. One of the reasons we don't see a lot of this development, or any of this development, in the last 8 years in the center part of the city is because it's hard. This is not easy stuff, and many of you can relate to that. There will be more affordable housing in the area. There are affordable housing projects being studied in the area. It's not my place to announce what those might be, but many of you know that. And so I think the question before you today is, are you in favor of this style of development taking place for ownership in this part of the city or not? Because I don't think the scale is wrong. I don't think the zoning tool that the city provides us, this PUR tool, is inappropriate. And as I mentioned earlier, upon your approval, we will continue to have discussions with the neighbors and the neighborhood association. I will attend as many of those meetings as I can myself. I'll host the meetings. As long as people are reasonable, I'm sure we can find an aesthetic compromise or an aesthetic tweak. They have provided us with, some of them have provided us with images that they'd like to see, and candidly, those images, if they think ours are at one extreme, theirs are at the other extreme, and I'm probably not interested in doing that. But I'm happy to meet, and like I said, upon your approval, we will continue some discussions, and we'll get to the city council when we get there, and if the group collectively is comfortable that we've all worked together and worked hard and we've come up with something that makes sense for everyone, then hopefully the city council will approve that. And if we get to that point and the city council feels that it's not appropriate, then they won't approve it.
Jay, did you start off today talking about softening the exterior?
Colors.
Yeah, the colors and everything. Under that PUR, and you would continue to work with the neighbors on maybe some architectural changes, structural changes, I shouldn't say structural changes, but facade,
I think it's more materials.
okay, material changes.
Well, color changes.
All right. The board, you know, being that this is a PUR, we would, I guess, like to see what we would be voting on. It's hard, because of we're using that tool, it'd be nice to see what the end product is going to be and what we would be voting on.
Yeah, I think what I can confidently tell you is it would be colors. It wouldn't be material changes.
Okay.
And we're going to ask you to vote today. And if your decision is that you're not in favor of the project, then so be it.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to address? We had the you've talked, I think, most.
I was making
parking,
notes.
The affordability.
Affordability.
We just talked about.
I think we
Go ahead
talked
if you
about
got more to say.
affordability. I don't think we mentioned we're including bike parking. We talked about adverse possession. Things like waiver requests and a violation of the code. Those aren't the case here when you use the PUR mechanism. I told you about the trees. We addressed the parking ratio. I listed the things that we have already changed. And I think that's it, unless you have some questions.
I wrote down everything. I think you've addressed everything.
Jay, when you talk about color differences, are you talking about color differences on the brick or just paint colors, or what are you talking about on
I
that
think
at this
it's
point?
probably the palette. So it could be some of each.
Okay.
Shouldn't say some of each. It would be, we will look at the color palette of all of the materials and see what makes the most sense.
Okay.
Would you guys be willing to accept a layover today to further have those conversations and come back with what the final color scheme would be, just so we, kind of like what Chairman talked about, have a final idea of what it is that we're voting on?
No,
You'd be done?
you got to be up or down today. And if we're done, we're done.
Okay, any additional comments, questions from the board? Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Eric, may we hear from the city, please?
Sure. Try to touch on as many of these items as I can. I guess starting with the PUR tool, and Jay spoke about that some, but the PUR is intended to encourage redevelopment of parcels served by existing infrastructure while providing flexibility in site design, and further intended to enable implementation of master plan goals that promote redevelopment in older areas of the city with complex and often constrained lot conditions. The zoning code that we have is mostly a suburban code. Redevelopment in the established parts of our city is very difficult with the codes and regulations that are in place by the zoning code. And so that was part of the reason we implemented the PUR tool a handful of years ago. And what that allows is a collaborative effort in looking at increased design that uses our urban design standards, which is our highest design standards that we have in the zoning code, while also looking at factoring in relief of certain regulations that are very difficult to obtain in certain parts of the city or on certain sites. So it is not uncommon for there to be several waivers incorporated into the PUR process. The future land use for this property is high-density residential. The whole area is high-density residential in the future land use, even though some of the properties are zoned low-density. What high-density residential means is the city would usually support rezonings to R6, R7, and R8 zoning. It is true if this property You know, if a rezoning was asked to rezone the property to R7 or R8, a conceptual site plan could be submitted, and the city would most likely be supportive of that rezoning. Now, that doesn't lock in any place, site plan, building elevations, or anything. So it is true that a rezoning could come through the process if that was approved by planning board and city council, and someone could seek waivers of any potential zoning regulations through the zoning board of appeals. You know, the city, we do prefer utilizing the PUR tool because we believe it's a more collaborative effort with neighbors and the city in general. Regarding density, we have seen many other projects in this area that are considered more dense. I believe it's 1,100 square feet site area per unit. That's almost compliant with the R7 regulations. Parking, we have supported a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning one parking stall on site for every residential unit. This project does well exceed that, as mentioned by the applicant, and almost complies with the normal parking regulation and code. Regarding the adverse possession issue, as far as the department sees it, that would have to come down to a judge telling us that the property line has changed. We only can base our information off of the information that is available to us and surveys and documentation that reflects what the property line is. Douglas County Assessor's Office, our GIS, shows the property line where it's at right now as reflective of the site plan submitted. That being said, if a judge would declare that the property line moved and this project had moved forward receiving certain waivers through city council, there could be the need for a major amendment to the PUD if that lot line changes. Haven't personally seen that with any PURs, so we would have to discuss that with the law department, but that is a possibility. The site is within National Register district, and there is a difference between that and a local district. There are certain limits to the specific design regulations that staff can apply. We do have a comment in the report that mentions additional consideration should be given to the design of the east and south building elevations, and we believe a little bit of additional primary material should be added to those, and our recommendation for approval mentions that. But conditionally, with that condition, repetitive there, we believe that it complies with the urban design standards, what is our allowed purview with this tool. I think that is all that I was going to get into. If you have any questions, let me know, but staff recommends approval of the PUR overlay district subject to submittal of acceptable final PUR plans, including acceptable building elevations prior to forwarding the request to City Council.
Before I ask for a motion, I'm just going to say this, Jay, I wished you were open to a layover today. And I don't know what motion's going to come from the board, and I don't know if it's going to be voted up or down today. I don't have a problem with your design. I'm sorry to the neighbors. I kind of like the looks of the design. It doesn't bother me. I like it, like the looks of it. But I know there's people on the board that would like to know the final, what is going to be a final look. And if you wanted to work with the neighbors, that would be good in my eyes that could happen. But you've determined today that you do not want a layover. You want an up or down vote. Is that correct? Okay. All right. Do we have any additional comments or questions from the board? Do we have a motion?
I'll just make a comment. Those of you who are here every time know that I'm traditionally not crazy about changes in neighborhood zoning that add these types of developments, because I think when you move into a neighborhood, you should have some certainty of what you're going to be living next to. That said, I do appreciate the utilization of the PUR rather than a rezoning request. But for me, these go a little too far in the PUR. I do not think you are required to build an old-looking building. I don't think the neighborhood has to be completely homogeneous. I don't mind modern buildings, but I would like to see a little greater effort to complement the neighborhood, and I know that you do great work. I've seen your work throughout the city. And I know that you will be willing to make some tweaks. I just would like to see what those tweaks are before I approve it.
Any additional comments or questions?
I mean, I have no doubt that what Noddle Company would build would be a great project. But I'm cognizant of the fact that we have so many people here that are against it, or at least just want to continue to have a conversation, and I wish we could lay it over. But it doesn't sound like that's in the cards.
Well, just a point, you can, I mean, you can vote to approve, to deny, or to lay over, just to be clear that.
Well, then I'll move the layover.
Well, just, Sydney, did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to comment. I appreciate all the comments, and I'm with Patrick I actually like the design of the building too. I think it's something that we both talked earlier. It's something that we would live in. Well, it's a very nice design. I think the affordability issue is something that I struggle with as well. And I do kind of echo the sentiments of the board that I wish you'd be more open to a layover, so that the conversations with the neighborhood could continue, so that the project can happen, because I do like the project. I think it would be an add for the neighborhood, and so.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, Jay, the public hearing's closed, but I will ask you to come up. Sorry, Jay, give your name and address again.
I'll take it as though that was a question. Jay Noddle, 2285 South 67th Street. Look, here's what I don't want to have happen. We have a number of other opportunities in the area to build these projects. And I want to build some of these projects. If a layover means we're going to talk about colors and some simple tweaks, that's one thing. If a layover means we're going to start to talk about a two-story building with 7 units in it, or townhomes, and significantly change the scale of the project, then that's what we're not interested in. We will move on. And what I don't know, based on the interaction we've had with the neighbors, is whether they can live with that or not. You know, I've heard that we're not responsive. I've heard they're disappointed in us. I've heard that all the things we haven't done, yet, you know, I've been doing this for 40 years. And I trust my staff. And I know that we've listened. I know we've made changes. I know we've sent emails that have gone unresponded to. And I don't want to do this and come back in a month and be in the same place. I really don't. So, and I don't get an indication from the neighbors that they're going to be comfortable with something that doesn't go through real significant downsizing and change. That's my issue. And I don't want anybody to think we are not a huge fan of this neighborhood. I mean, 50% of my time these days is devoted to the core of our city on a volunteer basis. So I want to do this, but I don't want to be painted into a corner where we've spent a bunch of time and the only option we have is the project that is 2/3 or 50% of the scale of this. That's not what we're interested in. I mean, the other thing I could do is just buy the lot and we'll just sit there until there's a different attitude in the neighborhood. That's not something we normally do either.
Rhonda, please. Jay
That's-
never said a word during any of your testimony. Please don't interrupt his.
So, you know, I don't know who this woman is necessarily, but what I do know is the emails that have gone unresponded to. You know, that's troubling, because we're trying. I think we've demonstrated that throughout the community, and particularly in the center part of the city. So that's my issue. If you, so I guess I'd say, I guess all of a sudden I'm talking myself into a layover. I really don't want to talk myself into a layover. But in the spirit of community, we will accept a 1-month layover, not 2 months and not 3 months. And if we can't get anywhere, or if based on what we do get done, I'll come at it that direction, we will do our very best in the next 30 days, and we will be back to you next month, assuming it can be scheduled that way. But next month, I want you to vote, up or down, no layover.
And let me just say for the record, I'd like to see tweaks bigger than color. So,
Okay. Maybe you can share those with us.
happy to.
I know you are.
And
Okay, thank
Jay,
you.
Jay, I'll just throw in there, and maybe you can look at this as the finalization of a due diligence process that, where the neighbors will feel heard, and that regardless of, you know, how you take their input, that they were heard. And sometimes, maybe not in this case, sometimes that's enough.
Well, and I appreciate that, and, you know, I don't know that this neighborhood knows us very well, but we pride ourselves in listening, so we will do that.
Thank you. Any additional comments? Dave?
I just want to make a couple comments, just in general for everybody that's here. The planning department, the city, establishes long-range goals for the entire development of the city. We have zoning, we have all these other things that we've talked about here today, and those are all designed to guide us down the path to the future so that we have organized development and growth over time. This particular area for the future, as has been demonstrated, is for a higher density. There's a lot of decisions that have been made in this community regarding that, for the health of our community, that we have a densification of this part of the city. It makes it a much more healthy city. Projects like this are a part of that. The goal that we have as a planning department and as a planning board is to look at entrepreneurs that come to us and want to invest in this community, and there are guidelines that they live within, and that's how they've come to us. They've selected this PUR, which the city has developed in order to implement a more logical solution to projects like this, and they've come in good faith choosing that, and the staff has worked with them. He's made an effort to meet with you. The bottom line is nobody's going to be able to put any project forward that meets everybody's ideas of what they want. That's the way it is. So the whole world, we live with compromise. Now, you talk about the aesthetics and what you want your area of the city to look like. There's other options available to you. The Omaha by Design is an effort for that very thing, to set some guidelines aesthetically and things like that of what our community is going to look like physically. And so those are methods that you can use. Your whole neighborhood association can come together and through a legal process, you can put limits on what happens in there as long as it works within the city's goals. Those are not done. You could have bought the land. Whatever reason you didn't, you didn't. So someone came along willing to invest in this, and he's brought a viable plan to us. And I think he's done from what I've seen from the testimony, he's done a good job of trying to cooperate with you. But again, it has to work functionally for him. It has to make money. And I commend you for giving us another month to take a look at it. But I'm going to put it on you guys to be realistic about working with him. Come to the table with a mind that will accept something different, because it's just not gonna stay the same. No place stays the same, and it grows over time. And that's a part of what makes a great community, what makes a great neighborhood, to have a mixture of different people. So, you want me to make a motion?
Did you steal my notes? Yeah, go ahead, if you want.
Patrick.
Okay,
Patrick,
Patrick, you make the motion.
Ready?
Okay.
I move for layover.
Second.
Do we want to put a limit on 30 days on, or the
Yes.
1 month late? Okay. All right.
And
a
before you
second?
vote, I do just want to point out that with 1 month layover, staff does not send new notifications to neighbors. So just be aware of that.
This is notification here.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you record the vote?
Franklin? Yes. Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion approved for layover.
I think that was our last agenda item, wasn't it? Do we have a motion on the pre? Okay, we have a motion. We have a motion and a second on the pre-meeting minutes from last month.
Okay.
We-
Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Franklin? Okay, motion approved.
Do we have a motion for the minutes from last month's public hearing? We have a motion and a second. Lisa, will you record the vote?
Carnes?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore? Morris? Franklin? Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion approved.
Do we have a motion for adjournment? We have a motion and a second for adjournment.
Okay. Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Franklin? Carnes?
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
motion to adjourn at 3:51.